So before jumping into a painting, I find a really good activity to start out acrylic painting with is just learning some acrylic painting basic techniques. So here I have my mixed media journal, and I'm going to show you some very basic techniques that are going to be useful in your acrylic painting journey. So the first one is blending, and blending is often done, for example, in a sunset. So what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna pick up some pink paint, and I'm gonna use my flat brush, and I'm gonna use back and forth strokes to apply the first paint color. So back and forth strokes allow the paint color to be applied really smoothly and evenly. I wanna apply it all the way down to about midpoint. And then when we want to blend a color, we're going to clean up the brush, and we want to make sure that this first pink color does not dry. So we want to work pretty fast. And then we're going to pick up some yellow paint, and then we're going traditionally, and when you're creating a sunset, often beginners will just put the second color at the bottom of the first and then work their way down. But you can see it's very stark, like there's pink and there's yellow. There's no blending happening. So what you actually want to do is you want to apply that yellow color, but then you want to pull it up into that pink that's still wet and workable. And then that's going to create a really nice blended gradient. So it doesn't go from pink to yellow. It goes from pink to pink yellow to yellow. And that's going to give a nice blended look. And again, you want to use those horizontal back and forth strokes to keep it nice and even. That's going to create a nice blended gradient. Okay, so that's one technique. Now the second technique is called dry brushing. So with dry brushing, you guessed it, we're going to grab a dry brush. So we don't want any moisture, any water on it, because it's going to give us a really cool scratchy effect. So we're going to take a nice dry brush, and we're going to grab a little bit of paint on our brush. And then we're just going to, we don't want too much, but just a little bit. And then we're just going to make some nice scratchy strokes. And you can see the difference between when we had water on our brush. It makes these really fluid strokes that don't have the scratchy look. It's very even, blended, and very opaque. But when you do dry brushing, it gives these really cool scratchy strokes where you can see the color underneath. Here I just have white paper, but if you had a paint color underneath, you would see that through. So that's a really cool technique to do, is dry brushing. The next technique is called glazing. So I have some paint colors already applied and they're dried. Now what glazing is basically we're going to be thinning down our acrylic paint to like a watery, watercolor-like consistency. And it's going to become, instead of it being opaque, because usually acrylic paints go on, their quality is quite opaque, we can actually thin them down to watercolor consistency. And when you layer them on top, it's going to create a really beautiful glazing technique. So I'm going to grab my brush, and I've already thinned down some yellow paint. So all you're going to do is grab a little bit of water and thin it down so it's like a watercolor consistency, very fluid. Like if you tilt your palette, it would flow. Like that's the consistency we want. And then we're just going to grab some of that on a paintbrush, and then we're just going to swoop it right across that dried paint color. And you can see the color underneath, but it creates a glaze type effect, which looks really, really beautiful. I find this glazing effect looks really beautiful in abstract art. So that's technique number 3. Now technique number 4 is stippling. This is one of my favorites. So what we're gonna do for this is we're gonna grab a round brush, a really small detailed round brush. We're gonna grab a little bit of black paint on the tip, and then we're going to apply just the tip down on the paper, and you're gonna see it creates these little dots. This is a stippling effect. Pink. And again, the key with this is keeping it the paint color just on the tips of your round brush, and just lightly brushing, lightly tapping down on the brush So you don't want the whole brush to be on your surface. You just want the very tip to touch down, and that's going to give you a really cool stippled effect. Now, technique number 5 is one of my favorites, and it's stamping. So here, have fun, go through your house and pick out objects you think that will look good if you stamp them with acrylic paint. So I went through my recycling bin and I grabbed a little bottle cap. I grabbed a Q-tip, which is one of my favorite stamping tools, and a skewer, a wooden skewer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add a little bit of purple paint around the bottle cap, and then I'm going to stamp it down just like that. And then you can either, if you find your paint is running low, you can reload it, or you can just keep on stamping it, and it creates a really cool effect. And again, this works really well in abstract art. So now I'm going to show you how it looks with a skewer. It creates beautiful. I've used this before in creating flower stems. I find flower stems are really fine and they can be really tricky to get as a beginner. But if you use a skewer to stamp down your flower stems, you can get some really fine, beautiful lines. I use this in a lavender painting. And then finally, Q-tips. Now these, we shouldn't be using them in our ears apparently, but we can definitely use them in painting. So I would just grab a little bit on the tip of my Q-tip, and then you just want to stamp it down. So this is very similar to stippling, but you'll see that the circles are much bigger than the ones used with our brushes. So you can have fun here and go through your house. Recycling bins are often like, you'll get really good finds in your recycling bin, and just use your acrylic paint, put the paint on your stamping tool, and just play around with like different shapes that you can create with those tools. So that's stamping. Now finally is drip marks. Drip marks is also another favorite. So to do drip marks, we want to thin down our acrylic paint quite a bit. We want it to be in a similar consistency of that glazing method, where we've added quite a bit of water to really water down that thick acrylic paint to be like a watercolor consistency. And once it is, we're going to grab some on our brush. So we want to thin it down with water. We don't need anything fancy, but a lot of people will, there is a particular medium called glazing medium, and that makes sure that the difference between that and water is that sometimes water can dull down the pigments in acrylic paint. So if you don't want to dull down the pigments in acrylic paint, you can use this acrylic medium called glazing liquid, and that just thins it down without losing the pigmentation. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that really thin down paint with water, and you're going to create these little blobs on your paper, and you can add a little bit of extra water if you want onto them, and then we're going to see some magic happen. So then we're going to lift up our canvas or our surface, and we're going to let those drip marks take place. And sometimes you need to like shake it to get them to move, but you'll see that it creates a really beautiful flow. And also you can add, if you find they're not flowing as fast, you can just add a little bit of extra water to them, and then they'll flow a little bit better. So there we go. Whoops, see how fast it is? There we go. And there you have it. 6 basic acrylic painting techniques you can practice your skills with.